Scratchboard, etching, and engraving use different techniques, but the illustrations all have a certain look about them. In today's lesson, we'll explore the mark-making style inspired by those techniques. This is a beginner-friendly step-by-step. We'll practice the marks that create the illusion, apply the techniques to basic shapes, and bring it all together in a demonstration with the final mixed media ink and color project. For materials, a pencil and eraser, I'm using an H lead, a plastic and also kneaded eraser, a ruler, and if you have geometric templates, great. For inking, a set of fine liner pens. If you're keen to use dip pens, I'll demo those as well. Any of the pointed nibs will work, preferably mid-size bowl nibs like these, and your drawing ink of choice. I'm using a carbon pigment mix, waterproof India ink, preferably a paper surface that works for both graphite drawing and inking, not too toothy. We'll be applying ink to all our sketch exercises. I'll be using pencils for coloring the line work. The list of supplies and other resources mentioned in this video is linked in the description below, including the blog post with additional tips. Of course, use the materials you have on hand. The key to producing the effects of the style relies on a line quality. Line quality is the variation of line weight, thin to thick to thin. In some illustrations, particularly in an engraving, we get the impression of a continuous line that thins and swells as it snakes its way along and across the forms in the composition. For this Gustave Doré engraving, you can follow the line as it contours the folds. It swells to solid black in the shadows and thins out in the highlights. So what determines the thickness of the line is the source of light. For this, we need to understand the principles of lighting and shading as it pertains to form. In this Bernie Wrightson illustration, again, looking at the drapery of his shirt, whatever is concave, such as the bulges in the fabric, is closest to the light source. In pen and ink, a highlight is often interpreted by using sparse rendering or none, leaving the white of the paper blank. Following that logic, the areas that are convex or simply further from the light source are then darker, meaning lots of rendering or solid black in those areas. In simplified terms, using this technique of mark making, the strokes are like bumpy waves that thin and swell depending on their exposure to the light as they contour the form. All the values in between are there to describe how close or how far that wave is to the light source. Then they're cast shadows. But for now, let's see how these principles translate to our desired mark making technique. We said the thickness of the line is dependent on the amount of light coming through. Since the marks are affected by the values, it makes sense to start with a value scale. But rather than a traditional scale with value squares, for this exercise, we'll assign one value to each stroke and call them value weights. In pencil, sketch a vertical rectangle, 3 inches tall and 1 inch across. Add tick marks as guides along the side of your rectangle, 1/4 inch apart. Join the notches with horizontal guidelines. The top line is blank for the 0 weight. Go ahead and number these 0 down to 12. The number 1 weight is light dots spaced wide apart. If you're using a fine liner, use a 01. With a dip pen, ink lightly without applying pressure on the nib. The second weight is a lightly dotted line spaced evenly apart, but a little closer than the previous line. Next, every second dot turns into a short dash. Now, dashes only. Next weight, short and long dashes. For line value number 6, we have a solid line. For value weight number 7, go one size up or use pressure on the nib, or double it for a thicker line than number 6. For number 8, it gets interesting. We'll say it's sunny on the left side. The right side is in shadow. In pencil, draw a vertical curved line started at the end of 7, diagonally across to the start of 12. At the start of the dark zone, thicken either side of your main line. Close up, it looks something like this. You have your main line, that start zone here. Add one line on this side, build it gradually in the shape of a wedge. Repeat on the other side so it looks like a long, skinny triangle. When you get the principle, aim for a smoother transition. Go up a tip size for number 9 and continue to build the weight of it. Repeat the process of incrementally increasing the thickness of the line as you progress to 10, 11, and 12 of your weight value scale. If this was the crease of a fold, the dark zone would extend like this. In pencil, draw 5 wavy lines. With the light on the top left-hand corner, we'll start with the base value weight, the bump in the light. That's our value weight 1 to 4, and the baseline is 6. As we get closer to the dark zone, the line weight values match. For more practice with the thickening wedge lines, especially with a dip pen, I highly recommend the exercises from Arthur Gutpill's book. Let's practice mapping subjects. We begin with a basic square. Measure out 3/4 inch square, then turn your square into a 3-dimensional box. No need for perfection, just convincing enough. Now add horizontal guidelines to each panel, equal strokes apart. What makes this technique different is that the rendering is primarily a cross-contour line, going across the form, around the form. You see here the line work isn't up and down, it contours around. With the source of light at the top left-hand corner, start rendering the top panel as the lightest. We've already practiced this, so go ahead and shade it with our line weight values 1 to 5. I'm using a 01 tip pen. The front panel fades from 3 to 6. The back panel starts at 6, then to 7. This is our first pass. Remember, the thicker weight values we build on top of number 7. Now go ahead and wedge your lines from top to bottom and dark to light, starting from the front panel. Now add the contour line, leaving some gaps where there's more light. Another characteristic of the style is that there's sometimes cross-hatching, but it has a particular shape. It looks more like a knit. Avoid this square look. We're aiming more for a diamond pattern. The sweet spot is between 30 and 45 degrees. And it looks even better if you put a slight curve to your crossing strokes. And with the wedge treatment, where the lines cross is where the dark zone happens. Some artists place a dot in the center of the diamond or dash the crossing strokes, like Master Mobius does. Let's apply a crosshatch texture to our box, minding the source of light. With the cylinder, we'll use the same principle. Map the lines across the form, which is now curved. We also placed vertical guidelines to indicate the highlights and core shadow, our dark zone. Since the object is more rounded, there will also be a reflected light close to the edges. Here's an example from Arthur Gutfield's book, just as a shading and lighting reference. Same process as for the box, starting with my smallest tip for the baseline weights. Remember to use the lighter weight values on the highlighted part of the cylinder. Erase the pencil lines and touch up the outline. Optional to add a cross-hatching. I'm using a template for the sphere, a smaller circle for the highlight. I lightly penciled in some shading for the core shadow just as a reminder. The cross contour guideline unwinds from the highlight circle, then progressively unravels. This one takes a bit of patience. Go ahead, starting with your highlighted area with your 01 pen. Then switch to the 03 for the remainder of the base weight for the first pass. On the next pass, we start to build the weight of the core shadow. Then transition the midtones. Keep adjusting the values to make the sphere appear round. I think it looks good as is, but let's layer in a bit of crosshatch in the darkest areas. My hatch came out a bit too square, but I'll keep the wedges a bit more subtle here. And we finish by erasing the graphite. To demonstrate the effect of this technique, I've now switched to my Moleskine sketchbook. On the blank page, we'll render a final project here. I'm referring to this royalty-free image of a rooster for proportions, but I'm simplifying the design. Here are preliminary doodles I did earlier as thumbnail concepts. This demo will be quick here, but do visit the companion blog post for the reference. Once the basic shapes are laid down, we can refine the details. there's no feet in the reference, so maybe some blades of grass to balance the composition. Next, I'll map our rooster design with contour guidelines. To save time, I've spaced the lines further apart in some areas, but intend to add lines in between at the inking stage. For the ink application, I'll be using this purple pumpkin nib. As you can see, the line quality range is broad with this pen, so the thin to thick line weight value we practiced in earlier exercises can be accomplished nearly in a single swoop. This means that instead of doing 3 passes with ink, I do only 1 or 2. Because of this, my first pass looks like all the values are in, but I will make further adjustments to the midtones and contrasts later in the second pass. It may seem like it would be quicker than a fine liner method for emulating the scratchboard engraving technique with a dip pen, but it's actually a toss-up. Using a dip pen requires more control, therefore it presents a risk of messing up the values with accidental excess pressure and the danger of smudging wet ink. Typically, I'd work left to right on the picture plane as I'm right-handed. Here I'm working left to right in sections on the subject because I wanted to start with the eye. It's more possible to correct mistakes with fine liners than with dip pens. With a dip pen, there's time spent re-dipping in ink and keeping the nib clean while in use to ensure proper ink flow the way you want it to. To me, the main benefit of inking with liquid ink is how dark and clean it looks. Plus, once it's dry, you have plenty of options for color mediums. There are pros and cons to dip pens. To learn more about how to use them for your projects, I have a full course on that. If today's technique practice inspired you, you'll find several books and online resources from the artists mentioned in this video linked below. Thanks for suggesting the style of rendering to feature in a video. I keep track of all your suggestions, so keep them coming. Remember to like and subscribe because it really does help a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.